Thank you. First, I will say thank you for the invitation. I mean, I'm honored actually because somebody told me that the event of the Humboldt Lecture is some of the most important in Holland. And I booked into some of the former programs and saw, okay, it seems I can come in good company with this thing. In relation to the theme of this year, I mean, and who already said so, my interest has always been in the lived city, in the practices in the city and the everyday life in the cities and issues like that. And what I've used this lecture to do is to try to argue for an approach to urban life and politics also that I would call critical phenomenology. And it is, as I would say, a genetic, asubjective phenomenology that situates practical embodied consciousness in an interworld where meaning and materiality are inseparable. More concrete, I will say that actually what I'm trying to do is combine some series of social practice with a third generation phenomenology and some postcolonial thinking. Also because the later years I've been working quite a bit about the ethnic minorities in Copenhagen. But I also want actually to draw in some of that empirical work and use it in relation, talk about it in relation to a case study that is part of a project I have together with two colleagues in Roskilde that we called Paradoxical Spaces, Cross-Cultural Encounters in Public Space. So that means actually that, let's see if I can use that. That the lecture will fall in three parts. I will start to talk about that case study, and very shortly, and that is about a mosque event, we call it, because it's the opening of a purpose-built mosque in Copenhagen. So it's a case that's not published yet, but I had to find something else that I sent down. I mean, it's no fun repeating the same cases that were already sent to people. And after that, I will look more on the theoretical framing. And I will end up related to my thinking about, I mean, to revive some kind of humanism after post-humanism. That actually some kind of humanism that avoids some of the problems that the old ones have. That's why I call it new. I don't know if it's so new at all actually, but we will see that. I'll start with the case. The El-Baraya Mosque opened June 19, 2014 in Copenhagen. It's a Sunni Muslim mosque, and it was announced as being the first purpose-built mosque in Copenhagen. Not totally right, actually, because there's been a small one in the suburb earlier, but still, I mean, it was also met by the public as being the first one. The opening was a 3-day event. The first day there was a reception, an opening ceremony, and a revelation of the mosque. The second day we had the first Friday prayer in the new mosque. And the third day they had a lot of cultural arrangements, bazaar, lectures, debates, and things like that. I'll concentrate on the first day because there it was where the really happening was, if you can say so. The first big issue actually started already before that, because in the evening before, the TV programs came up with a lot about that new mosque that should open tomorrow, under the headline about saying the official Denmark opts out. And why that? Yes, because I mean the people who has been behind the building of the mosque had very ambitiously have a great invitation list for the opening. They invited the government, the party leaders, the members of parliament. They invited the royal family. They invited religious leaders from Copenhagen. And they invite all the municipal mayors. And the Prime Minister excused herself without reasoning. And if the Prime Minister don't come, then the royal family don't come. All the ministers and party leaders and most of the mayors also rejected the invitations with different kind of reasons. There was something about a sponsorship from Qatar. There was something about a spokesman for the mosque who actually had some unfortunate comments on homosexuality just a few days before. Somebody said no room in the diary. And there was a leftist party leader actually said, oh no, I'm not religious, so I don't go to openings of a mosque. So only a few politicians came, 2 mayors, I think, and they was actually arguing about, okay, I mean, if you want a dialogue with the Muslims in Copenhagen, you come. So it was a very strange experience with this participation. And the interesting thing is actually the clerical establishments reacted in the opposite way. The Bishop of Copenhagen came, local vicars was there, leaders of the Catholic congregation was there, Shia Muslim leaders was there, even if it was a Sunni Muslim mosque. All this indicating that the will to dialogue between the local religious communions was actually quite strong. So there's was really an opposition in this thing. Okay, I'll return to this, some of these paradoxes early on, and go on actually to the really opening event, the inauguration ceremony. And it had two parts actually. A reception first, then some speeches going on, and then the revelation of the mosque itself. The speeches was, amongst others, by the representation for the mosque. They talked about, how the community center was open to everybody, and they really wanted to all people from the local community to come to their place. And they thanked the municipality because the planning process has actually been relatively smooth. And they thanked the Emir of the Qatar for the funding he has been doing to the mosque. Then the Qatarian Minister for Religious Affairs was there, and he was talking about bridges between civilizations. The Bishop of Copenhagen was talking, and he was really making a congratulation to the people about having finally got their mosque. And he also talked about the architecture of the mosque, that he said, okay, he saw that as some kind of combination of Nordic kind of architecture and the traditional Islamic one. So the interesting thing I think about that talks was that actually neither the people of the mosque itself nor the Qatarian minister actually avoided that thing about discussing the funding, but they tried actually to take the dramatics out of that discussion. Okay, the peak of the event was really, the revelation of the mosque. And I think I could illustrate that best actually by reading this part taken out from our field notes around that experience. After the first part of the ceremony, everybody was invited into the mosque. I do not know what was most overwhelming, to go in there or to feel the seriousness and the admiration by which the Muslim participants go inside. Maybe mostly the latter. Focus is on the Qatar group. They sit down under the dome in the middle of the room. The rest of us take place in a ring around them. Suddenly a live show starts in the dome. It is completely wild. Several colors, formations, projections. After the show, the daylight is slowly let into the room through small windows in the dome, whereupon automatic blinds are drawn to the big windows of the facade. The ornamentation of the walls and the ceilings appear. The panels are cut in wood and the rest of the walls are cast in plaster. It is spectacular. It makes sense. The floor is covered by thick red carpet with broad stripes of golden vine. The decorations of the walls and the ceiling manifest themselves with cultural and historical references. I take that, took that quotation in here because it underlines, I think, the emotionality and the intensity that actually was in that event. Elements like the people, the speeches, the lights, the architecture, the decorations, and the religious emotions were drawn together into an intense interference and shaping an electrifying atmosphere, what I would call an affective space. Oops, what did I do now? That was good enough. The third thing I will say about the event is the subjectification actually coming out of the event. We did some on-the-spot interviews with some of the participants, and I have taken up a few quotes from that. This is historical and a very special experience to me. Another one said, "It is really great to come to a place where you feel at home." And a third one, "Now I can better feel at home and call myself a Danish Muslim." So it just demonstrates the connection between that visibility of Islam and Islamic symbols there is to also the construction of identity and of citizenship. So I think it's actually it's important element as well. Lastly, and maybe in continuation of this, I will talk a little bit about the public debate that was in the newspapers around the event. Because that visibility also trigger off the perception of Islamic difference, and it actually ended up having heated debates in the media, evolving around the symbolic, about security and fear, and about gender and sexuality. the symbolic part is actually oscillating between two extremes. One of them is talking about how the appearance are a symbol of our values. It's our freedom of religion, our democracy and openness that actually we can see here. That is a celebration, but a special kind of celebration actually, because it's not so much about respect and recognition, it's about tolerance. A tolerance with reservations, anxiety, and uncertainty that is actually gradually sliding into the other end of that oscillation, namely some stereotypical us-them binaries that essentialize the difference between Danishness and Islam, as you can see on the second quote up there. The second thing that was in the public debate was about security and fear. And it was about seeing the mosque as a place for radicalization and potential terror. It was compensated by sorry about that, it's Denmark, this thing, a satirical drawing. And it was actually how the conservative newspaper Berlingske Tidende met the new mosque. And actually, marking it as a symbol of war and terror, indicating the relations to Qatar and also to ISIL. And in this way, really, I would say, living up to the tradition of satirical drawings in Denmark. But funny enough, actually, there was not so much debate about it. Maybe people don't really want to do it anymore. But also, I mean, the little, can I use that? Yeah. The little dustbin there, waste bin there, actually was relating to sexuality and gender. Because the text on that is to gay and lesbian infidels. And that is, of course, related to this thing about homosexuality in that way. So if I should finish, I think, this short look into the event, I would say that tentative case conclusion could be something about paradoxical spaces. About the public visibility of Islam, we already talked about this, but also, I mean, this was actually taken into the whole architecture of the mosque as well, because that so-called the neutral and modern facade of the outer part, as we saw, was actually very intentional. They wouldn't want to divert too much for the things from the buildings around. So they were very considered about how the outside should be. But then they really took revenge in the inside, and there all the decorations came. So they have actually incorporated that paradox, I think, into the whole architecture, and actually also said so when we talked to them. The third paradox I will mention is the public debate, between the public debate and the local neighborhood. Because we also did on-spot interviews in the neighborhood around where it was built. And quite a few was a little bit indifferent. They say, okay, that don't bother me, so I don't care. But quite a few of them actually was expressing their joy that their Muslim neighbors now actually are possible to practice their religion in a worthy place. So the local neighborhood and the broader public was very different actually in their reactions in that way. Okay, it was just to say, I mean, that what I'm discussing in this relation about urban life and urban encounters and actually, I mean, is, I think, as much as the theoretical end is also based in those cases we have been working with. What I'll do now is actually say a little bit about the theoretical framing around this thing. And I choose to emphasize three elements also because, I mean, I come out of especially this case. The first element is what I will call the primacy of encounters. Because it's actually a pivotal point of our whole project, that actually, I mean, we give ontological primacy to encounters. For instance, Merleau-Ponty some say said, others and my body are born together from one original ecstasy. And I think actually this is one could be summed a bit in this quotation. There's actually, I mean, evolving the whole idea of Merleau-Ponty's of incorporeality, but also thinking about, I mean, the spatial negotiations of likeness and unlikeness that is going on. And it's partially about the temporality and spatiality of face-to-face meetings. Both Merleau-Ponty and Levinas is actually very much appraising this thing about the face meeting the other face. But it's important also to think that that kind of meetings are also mediated. They are spatial and temporal through historical geographical mediation. We bear into the present encounters ones coming from other spaces and other times. For example, the colonial histories and the geographical imaginations you have of other parts of the world. So that leads me to another point, that is that actually also, I mean, that encounters are deeply charged with emotions. The postcolonial author Sarah Ahmed talk about strange encounters and saying that a strange encounter is played out on the body and played out with emotions. And to say it very, very shortly, we maybe have a chance of discussing it more tomorrow. That means that I work with an understanding of emotion as situated corporeal attitudes, involving in duality between, on the one hand, expressive spaces that actually has to do with the performative element of emotions that is connected to the expressive and communicative body. I mean, we communicate our emotions with our bodies, with our faces, and with our bodies, and these things. The other side of the emotion are the affective space. That is where we are emotionally in touch, open to the world that is affecting us. I mean, we saw that a little bit in the atmosphere, in the revelation of the mosque. Then I'll say a few words about the specific encounters in this mosque case. Because, I mean, the important thing here is also, I mean, these are not only face-to-face encounters. It is also encounters mediated through materiality. mediated to the architecture and the visible symbolic signs attached to the mosque, the domes and minarets, for instance. And the other point here is that this encounters here are actually connected to a specific event. And then made us think that we have to have an understanding of this thing about the event. What do we mean when we talk about an event? And there again, we start from third generation phenomenology and practice theory, where we actually are emphasizing that a shift from of existence from being to happening, to emphasis on things that is and things that happens. And it is, I think, it is shift between the traditional phenomenology and the third generation one. But to get a little closer to the event, we also looked a bit into Deleuze and Badiou. Admittedly, I would say, a very symptomatic and pragmatic reading, because we try to go a little bit around their post-humanist thinking and find try to draw out aspects that we find useful for our purpose. And also that would be compatible with our practice thinking. And that led us to 4 significant aspects of the event. The first one is Badiou's idea of break or transformation. Because here, I mean, the opening of the mosque, actually, when we are moving Islam from invisibility to visibility, it actually initiates a new symbolic order of public space. A symbolic order that actually are giving occasion for some cultural dissonance and public dispute, as we saw. The second one, the intensity of the event, is one of the things that also that the Deleuze emphasizes a lot. We actually could see when the performance of the opening draw together those intrinsic properties such as people, sound, lights, architecture, atmosphere, moods and emotions into what Deleuze would call an intense conjunction. So it was also a great help to us in our interpretation. Then we want to talk about the subjectification of the event, because the affective processes and the space of the event actually, I mean, did subjectify here through emotional registers, identifications, and citizenship, as we saw in the small course before. Oh, I got it wrong. Yeah. I just got to shift a little too early. The last thing is the context. But you are talking about situation or eventual side. And here I think the context we have to understand this thing is 2 things. It is the whole religious secular power regime in the Danish society. The bigger context. A smaller context is the local particularities of the neighborhood where the mosque was built. We saw that in this paradox with the public debate, and it is because probably Nørrebro, the area where this a bit, is the most multicultural part of Copenhagen, and so there is an atmosphere. There is a different atmosphere in that neighborhood probably than in many others. Okay. The last thing I would talk a little bit about here is I think that what we are talking about here, both in the primacy of encounters and some of these things about the event, also connects to how we actually do understand the body. I think it's important, our whole approach actually, how you think the body. And again, I mean, I've been starting from Merleau-Ponty's genetic phenomenology that actually situates the practical embodied consciousness in the world, an interworld where matter and meaning are inseparable. And I think it's important in that sense that the body is not just an object in the world. Neither is it a mere assemblage or juxtaposition of its parts. It is in this connection a phenomenal lived body, dynamic and changing through an environment that is both affected that it is both affected by and actually actively shaping. So this, I mean, close connected to the world, as the phenomenologists would say, or the environment is important for the body in this sense. And I just took out a few aspects of this thing about the body. The first one is that the phenomenal body is spatial and temporal. And it's best illustrated, I think, by quotations from both Merleau-Ponty but also from Henri Lefebvre, who's both of them actually are writing very much into how the body and space is connected. And what those quotations emphasize, I think, is that bodily existence is always involvement. Not just being in space, if you can talk about that, because is space something you can be in, but that's another discussion. But it's always practices oriented towards things and other people. It's again this thing about both other people and the material part. Yes. The other point was that the phenomenal body is inherently reflexive. But when we are talking about being reflexive here, it is reflexivity related to perception and to the knowing body. It's just not just, you know, a mental thing. And the key word, I think, in Merleau-Ponty in this sense is reversibility. We are what he calls perceiving percepticles. That means visible seers, tangible touchers, audible listeners, etc. But we are also both self-percipient. We can see ourselves as seers. And we are intercorporeal. We can actually share sensuous experiences. So that whole reversibility is, based in the intercorporeality. What is also crucial here, I think, is reversibility is never perfect. There's also always some breaks, actually, where Merleau-Ponty would say subjectivity and agency slips in, not as rational subjectivity, but as some kind of agentic capacities emerging from our intercorporeal world. So it's actually, it's emergent agency, and it's agency becoming, you could say. Finally, the phenomenal body is ridden with power. The body is both vehicle and victims of power. I would take out just two small things in relation to that. The first thing is about incorporation. The lived body always are layered with social and historical meaning. It is layered with sedimented history, which is both sociocultural and personal. Actually, if you look at the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, his concept of habitus is actually what catch up some of these incorporations in this sense. I would also emphasize the vulnerability of the body. Vulnerability to both physical and symbolic violence. Bodies become objectified, they become imprisoned, excluded, exploited, and they become subjected to gaze and surveillance. Some of the very well-known things from Frantz Fanon's work, for instance, is about actually when black bodies is actually practicing or living in white space. They develop a double consciousness because they have to actually be related to both their own consciousness and identity, but also to the identity ascribed to them by the white man. He has that beautiful little stories that he returns to from time to time during his book. That is about being walking on the street, and on the other side of the street there was a white mother walking with her little boy, and the little boy said to his mom, "Mom, a black man, I'm frightened. I'm afraid. I'm frightened. I'm frightened. I'm frightened." And he said, "I suddenly realized it was my body that did that, and that was how I was experienced." So it's just a little story he told to illustrate that double consciousness you had to relate to. Some picks I've taken out our theoretical framing that I think relates to what I'll be talking about today. As the last part here of the lecture, I was talking about this thing about a so-called new humanism. And it is because, much social and cultural theory have been for some years now actually dominated by anti-humanist and post-humanist thinking. And no doubt about there's many theoretical gains from these things, about power-knowledge complex, about representation, and about what is called the new materialisms. Still, I feel a bit uncomfortable, because in some sense I think that it is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I feel that some of them have a troubled relationship to issues of lived experience, understanding of agency, and in its strongest forms also to responsibility and politics. And that's why I think actually that the critical phenomenology as sketched out here can be a help in a search for that new humanism. And of course, because the reason I say new in this way is that when you're looking at this quotation from Merleau-Ponty from 1960, you can see, okay, it's not the first time this discussion comes up. But still, I've tried to argue and develop the aspects a little more. And I think one of the problems is actually, we always do that in academics, don't we? Making scapegoats. We always do that when we are going to promote some approach, you really put the other one in a very, very simple way. And I think a problem actually with a lot of discussions of humanism has been that many people doesn't say what they actually mean about humanism. That's why I actually like so much the differentiation that Siudaciatsky, the American philosopher, made of it, because at least it helped me a lot to think about it. He distinguished between 5 forms of humanism. The first one is epistemological humanism. This is about actually saying that human mind is exclusively the place where knowledge is formed. Second one he mentions is psychological humanism, that actually consider humans as masters of both their psyches and the phenomena meaning. The definitional humanism, saying the being of humanity is such that human life differs absolutely from animal life. The agential humanism consider humanism the most important or the most significant to social life on earth. And finally, value humanism proclaims that humans are responsible for political ethical values. I think a lot of us can agree about the first 3 are today indefensible. The last 2, I think, is more ambiguous. And as I see it, at the same time, they are decisive to critical engagement. If we are going to work for a just hospital world, they are necessary in some form. And it's here I actually think that the critical phenomenology can contribute. I would emphasize 3 points here. It includes the experiential dimension of social life. That is the modest, situated experience of everyday life, embodied, intercorporeal, and interwoven with power. I always have a little bit difficulties when I talk about experience in English, because I think actually the English language is a little lacking in relation to Scandinavian languages and in relation to German. So I suppose also in relation to Dutch, even if I don't know. Because in German, I won't bother you with the Danish one. but in German, you are talking about Erlebnis and Erfahrung. Where Erlebnis is the more immediate experience, and Erfahrung, the more deeper ones, actually taking in this whole thing about heritage and habitus and the way things are incorporated. And in English, they use the same word as both. So in that sense, it is a little bit difficult. I'll just say it because I think it's important in this relation actually to have involved the erfahrung. The other point is openness towards the other, human and non-human. I mean, phenomenology emphasizes different modes of coexistence, at least I would say this kind of third generation, as I call them. Different modes of existence or coexistence, always as provisional, imperfect solutions to concrete problems of collective life that will always underchanged. Finally, it rethinks agency as agentic capacities that originate in the intercorporeal interworld. Emergent subjects coming out of corporeal existence and particularly interworlds, and actually acting in with processes of interrogation, of improvisation, and of transformation. I'll try to develop a little bit about how this can add to this residual humanism we could talk about. That Sjarsky called agential humanism and value humanism. And how it's also actually spatial. The first one I would say it's about agential humanism. There, where you have the body-space relations for meaning, interrogation, improvisation, transformation, they take form of spatial operations. The game of ordinary people when they move along in a creative way in a network of already established materialities and representations of the city. Actually, think already authors that Michel de Certeau and Henri Lefebvre have dealt with this thing. But that's some phenomenology part of them as well. Because it's about spatial realization or acting out of space. How body subjects spatialize, weave places together, actualize possibilities, leaves others unused, privilege some of the spatial elements, transform or abandon others. The other thing here, I think, is about constitution of connections or relations between places in and across many spatial scales. And I think that's important actually, because here we come to some overlap in some of the so-called relational theories coming on here. Because, I mean, a lot of contemporary theories talk about how space and place are relational. And in that, we could involve both that historical geographical mediation I've talked about earlier from other places and other times. Mediation through technology and materiality, and that's actually what a lot of the theories is about, isn't it? But also I think it's important to say that connections is also about distinction and boundaries. Connection is not just everything flows together. No, it's actually also about that we create boundaries and distinctions. And the third one is appropriation of a space, and anybody who has come close to Henri Lefebvre actually probably know all about that. But it's about how actually resistance are going on in trying to make appropriate space for specific life, for specific activities. But I think it's very interesting actually to see in that relation empirically what has been going on many places, where you look about movements as occupancy. If you look about the whole discussion about indignant squares in Southern Europe, When you look about the Arab Spring, how deeply spatial a lot of those movements have been. I'll look a little bit also on value humanism. Or we could talk about embodied ethics. Because residual humanism are claiming that humans are responsible for political ethical values. It is so difficult to make the ships responsible, for instance. I just recently have heard a lecture about the agency of the ships, so critical phenomenology would locate that in encounters with the other, whatever it is, human or non-human others. One author that is very interesting here, I think, is Emmanuel Levinas, who talks about the responsibility for the other. Actually, he sees ethics as the primary relationship. He sees subjectivity as being for another. So encountering others is a way of encountering others in a way that allows them to retain their otherness. The feminist philosopher Claire Weiss talk about bodily imperatives, and there's some connections in that sense. So even if this thing is mostly argued around face-to-face, I think it's important also here to say, yeah, but encounters are also mediated. So here also, I mean, responsibility is not only about proximity, not about a Russian doll kind of responsibility, as Dori Massey is talking about. No, it's also about actually responsibility of distance. I talk too lot, so no, I don't. Not now. Just giving an example of that. We can do it later if you like, because I wanted to get a little bit to some kind of tentative conclusion here, and it's very tentative because it's actually beginning to think a little more political about these things and about some kind of politics of relationality in relation to these things. And I just have to say it's very, very tentative because it's not something I come very close into yet. But I feel actually that by involving 3 different third generation phenomenologists, I think there's a way into some of this. So I've just let it open here. The first one is, not surprising, Merleau-Ponty and his idea of intercorporeality, involving a relational subjectivity, no doubt about that. Subjectivity that is relational to itself, self-percipience, to the other, and to the world, the environment. So it's a quite existential, I think, element that's on the agenda here. The other one is Levinas' concept of alterity, where he actually, as we saw, are embracing difference. He said, the other are radical different, he says, but we really have to accept that and act from that. And the responsibility for the other, he says, is absolute and infinite. It's big words, but still. So it's the more ethical part, actually, we come into here. And the third one is, who I have not mentioned yet, because I only come to her quite recently, is Hannah Arendt. And her concept of plurality. And she talks about plurality as a paradox of equality and distinction. And for her, it is a political concept. It's about actually how it is supposed to be leading to practices of responsibility and practices of participation. So I think there's a way to go there, but I couldn't help bringing it in, even if not so long with it myself. So I will thank you for your attention.